How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Allowed's guide series on the Wild Beyond the Witchlight, a 5th edition module. In today's video, we'll be going over Bavlorna's Cottage and all of the dealings with this not so delightful individual. Of course, there is going to be a ton of spoilers, so players don't watch this, but DMs that want that added insight, go ahead and stick around because we have a lot to cover here. And here it is, Bavlorna's Cottage, directly in the center of Downfall, the location of the Soggy Court. So, the first thing we have to go over in regards of Bavlorna's Cottage is, why are your players showing up here? Well, of course, we've got the main hook of, hey, this is the adventure, play the adventure, but we've got a whole bunch of other things as well. There's a whole bunch of things leading our players to here. We've got, if your players are missing something, then they need to come here. We've got your players knowing that there is some big bad and they need to stop the big bad. We've got, if your players know that the Herringon took Clapperclaw's head, then they talk to the Herringon, and then the Herringon will say, oh, actually Bavlorna has it. So we have all these different hooks, and there's even more out there. So your players are eventually going to need to get in there. Now your players essentially have two options of getting in. Either one, they're going to take a raft and just go how you're traditionally supposed to go, but astute players are going to see that there's a whole bunch of clotheslines and may think, hey, maybe we should actually climb up on those clotheslines to sneak inside. So you're going to have to be ready for whatever it is that they choose to do, know which way they're going to be approaching from because there's the 4 clotheslines. If you want to make your life simple, then you can simply say that some of them snapped or they're just not there or whatever. You can definitely make your life easier. But I would say reward creativity and allow for your players to approach the situation in however manner they decide. Now, the first things first we need to go over is the fact that Bavlorna's Cottage is made of a whole bunch of soaking wood in the middle of a pond, and thus this place cannot catch on fire. Because I know so many scumbag players are going to say, well, let's burn the witch. Nah, don't let that happen. Fire doesn't work here, end of story. But secondly, we do get some really good things about the cottage here. We get the ceilings and rooftops, the doors and trapdoors, the floors and stairs. Something very important is it's kind of hard to sneak around here because it's so creaky. So if your players are trying to go for that super stealthy approach, they need to make DC 15 stealth checks, which is pretty hard if it's a group check for sure. We also get the fact that there is a whole bunch of light sources in here, which is good. And we get walls and windows. If anybody tries to go through a window, then they have to make strength checks. Or if they want to go from the outside, then they have to use dexterity checks. Not that terrible, really. But very importantly, we've got Bavlorna's Lornlings that are running around here. Now, Bavlorna's Lornlings are these little, basically mini versions of her that run around here and do various tasks, and whenever Bavlorna needs to, she eats them up, and she heals up, and she gets their memories, so pretty creepy right there. Pretty fitting with a Grimm's Fairy Tale vibe. Now on to the first floor. So we have this first floor. This is presumably if your players show up here by boat, then they're going to go right underneath in area 1 and be able to walk up the stairs to the main area. So they're going to see that there is this lily pad and they're going to see that there's this well. And in addition to that, they're going to see that mirror. So they're probably not going to know what any of the significance is unless you've shown Bavlorna flying around on her lily pad, unless your players have seen that the magic mirror actually has something to it. They're probably not going to know, and they're probably just going to meander off. They're probably going to be like, oh, there's definitely something to it, but they can't really do anything with it at the time. So the important thing is, here is, with this magic mirror, this leads us into the discussion of, this is a way for your players to go back to the real world, because this does connect to the Hall of Illusions. Now, you can have an adventure where your players keep on hopping back and forth between the Carnival and the Feywild, but me personally, I like the idea of being stuck in the Feywild because your players have to keep on moving forward. But of course, you can have a campaign where your players do a whole bunch of stuff, then go back to the real world, chill for a bit, then go back, and then repeat process. And if you do it that way, you can definitely introduce some fun mechanics of maybe time is changing out in the real world differently, or maybe time is changing back in Prismere differently. You can definitely have a lot of fun themes with that for sure. And of course, we can see that there's a gelatinous cube there, but that's for the quest that we'll be talking about later on. Basically, just the first floor is this little workshop area that's got this taxidermy workshop, and it's got this storage rooms, and this place should feel like it is definitely for a hag, because it's really creepy, right? We've got a taxidermy area. We got a whole bunch of dress dummies in weird things, one of which is a dark mantle. So if your players actually mess with that, then they could probably get into some issues there. And we've of course got all of the goodies there in Area 5. So realistically, this first floor is a lot of dress, but you know, the dress is good, right? This makes it feel really creepy. It makes it feel weird. And we can also see that there is 2 staircases that lead up. We've got a spiral staircase from the inside, and then we've also got a staircase that goes from the outside. So your players will be able to go up that spiral staircase and basically get right there to the second floor. But if they do decide to go through that other staircase that leads outside, then they could potentially fall down because there is some basically destroyed wood, and there's also a swarm of insects. So if you make it painfully obvious that this place is very rickety and there's a swarm of wasps there, they may decide to just say, yeah, screw that, or they may decide to overcome it and try to go the other way. Now, should your players go up the spiral staircase, they'll arrive in Area 7, where they'll immediately see that there's a door to the side, but if they look down the hallway, there's 2 other doors. But interesting enough, there is in fact a secret door here, which is something that I definitely think all adventures need. We need more secret doors, people. Now, when it comes to this secret door, I really like this because it is, specifically in that text that you read aloud, a framed oval mirror 2 feet wide and 5 feet tall hangs in the middle of one wall. And when your players pass by it, they're probably naturally going to look at it. And you can describe to them that their reflection has no emotion. And I'm more than willing to bet that if you have anybody at all, except if they lost the ability to smile, I'm willing to bet that if you say, oh yeah, your character has no expression, then they're probably going to smile to see what the thing does, in which case, boom, it opens right there. Now that does lead to the shrinking passage, but the important thing to note here is you shouldn't have it be known that it's a shrinking passage. You should make it look like an optical illusion. You can more lean in on Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory as they're walking down that hallway, or you can lean in on the Alice in Wonderland style of them walking in the places looking a bit different. You can lean into that approach. And once your players make their way all the way down, they can see that there's the door, which would be a tiny door, but for them, it's, you know, just a regular sized door. And if they make their way through, that's when they appear on the other side in a potion cabinet. But something I wanted to cover now is, if your players are generating a bunch of noise because they are trying to fight off the wasp, or they're just making a whole bunch of creaking stuff, then Bavlorna's going to know that the party's there, because the Lornlings are going to hear it, or maybe just herself will be able to hear it because they're so loud. So if your players are not being stealthy at all, or they just get caught, then don't have her be surprised. Just have Bavlorna keep on doing what she's doing, because she doesn't have any reason to antagonize the party yet. Now, if the party is being incredibly stealthy and does not get caught because they are going all Sam Fisher up in here, then for sure, you know, just keep on having what's going on. Have the certain NPCs that move around this place move around, have the daily functions going on, but make it feel like a lived-in location, because this is a campaign where you want everything to feel lived in, because we aren't going through these dank, dark dungeons that no one's been to in 1,000 years. No, this is a regularly used place. Make the sights, sounds, smells, maybe even taste, make them feel like this is a fairly used place. Now, if your players went up the other entrance, then they'll approach the kitchen, where they'll find a red cap going up against a bunch of vultures. So the thing about this scenario is, if your players know what red caps are, they're probably going to be like, oh, that's scary, but this red cap isn't going to immediately attack, so there's no worry there. Bloody Toes is just simply fighting off these vultures, and she's going to say, hey, help me get rid of these things. Now, something important to note is, this red cap does hate everything. Red Toes just hates everybody, everything, but she hates Bavlorna the most. So if your players do help in clearing out the vultures, then Red Toes is going to reveal a weakness of Bavlorna's. But there is the real possibility, and I know this is a real possibility because this happened in my group, that your players may not decide to help. In which case, what does Bloody Toes do? Bloody Toes isn't going to immediately attack, but that does mean that they might have an antagonist in the future. Now, directly outside of the kitchen, we get some cages that are dangling over. Your players would have been able to observe this if they had came from a certain direction. They would have seen that Vanzel the satyr is locked up in here, and he's naked and afraid. But he actually isn't that afraid. He's actually in good spirits. He's just a delightful individual. And if your party does help get Vanzel out of here, then Vanzel can prove a very useful ally and a friend. But, of course, you players need to get him out of here, and that could be the tricky part. It is either going to require a DC 25 athletics check or a DC 15 dexterity check with thieves tools. So at this level in the game, specifically at level 3, because they'd probably be level 3 when they get here, it is probably unlikely that anybody can make a DC 25 athletics check, but the Thieves' Tools is much easier. So another thing too is, Vanzel is actually really cool because not only can he serve as some sort of function of just giving your players a whole bunch of info, but also the fact that Vanzel actually hands out a Stone of Good Luck, which operates for 24 hours. Really cool. I really like temporary effects that make your players a little bit better because you can either have them try and rush in and do some good things while I still have this benefit, or you could say, hey, this is a 24-hour limit and you can turn it on for like 1 hour at a time and you have players use something that's incremental. I really like that kind of approach. Now, once your players do finally decide to make their way into the study, either because they're just simply exploring around or maybe they press their ears up to the door and hear this conversation, they'll be able to walk in and find Bavlorna talking with Charm. And the two are basically just having a delightful conversation, but Charm has an ulterior motive because she is actually distracting Bavlorna for some time while her shadow does some thieving. Now, this is a great roleplay opportunity because this is presumably going to be the first time your players interact with any one of the 3 hags, and this is also a great way to interact with Charm because Charm can be a recurring salesperson and can be totally fun to interact with. And also, of course, Bavlorna. Bavlorna can easily be a recurring character. Now, once again, if this is one of those games where your players just go in swords blazing, then they're not going to be able to stand a chance. If they're level 2 or level 3, then this hag is going to be able to mop the floor with them. And that's not including all of the lonelings that are floating around here. That's not including Charm herself, who would probably defend herself, but probably not fight on Bavlorna's behalf. She'd probably just dip. So really, this shouldn't come down to combat. This should be a roleplay scenario. Your players should know that they're way out of their league and thus be interacting with her in a certain way. So whether that be your players have had something stolen from Bavlorna or they want some dirt on any of the other hags, whatever it is, your players need to make a deal with Bavlorna. And she actually has several quests right from the get-go to help the players out. She says, hey, you can either fix my preservation pool, you can find my missing book, or you can pick up a package for me, and I will do something for you. Now, one of the best hooks to get your players moving forward with this campaign is the fact that Bavlorna will say, hey, I actually have something from you, and I will give it back to you, but I need you to do something for me. I need you to go over to my sister Skabatha, and I need you to take something from her. You need to steal my sister's portrait. So right there, great hook, right? Your players want this stolen thing, whether this be the sibling that I mentioned or whatever item or whatever sort of permanent effect is now on the PC. You now have an objective. Go to the next location and grab something from this hag and bring it back. Really great, really riveting. You know, just a lot of fun interplay here of getting your players from the next location to the next location. Now, also a great thing is your players need to make deals and they need to uphold those deals. She will say, deliver this thing to me in 8 days or else. And if your players do not deliver on that thing in 8 days, then they have to make a DC 19 charisma saving throw or be cursed. And if they fail, then they lose another object. Really great. You know, that keeps on piling on the, hey, you failed. That means you're going to have to continue doing stuff for me until you get it right. And at the end of the day, Bavlorna's going to get more than what she wants, right? So what I'm going to tell you is your roleplay as these 3 hags, as basically the 3 big bads of this entire campaign, needs to be spot on. You need to give these characters flavor and charm and whimsy, but most important of all, you need to give them that malice. Bavlorna is a bad person, but at the end of the day, she is upholden to the rules at hand. She has to play by those rules, and your players are going to know that. Your players are going to know that whatever she says goes, but at the same time, unless your players strike first, she's not going to strike at them. This campaign is really unique in that you meet all of these potential villains, but instead of it just boiling down to combat in the first 2 seconds, it is more than likely not going to be combat in the first 2 seconds. So you're going to have to brush up on that role play of yours, and you're going to have to make sure that these villains are villains that your players love to hate. Because I know for a fact what's going to happen for a lot of groups is, as soon as they interact with Bavlorna and figure out, oh hey, Bavlorna wants us to go mess with the other sister, that means when we go to mess with that sister's going to tell us to go to another sister and mess with them, and the cycle is going to repeat itself. Your players are probably going to figure out early on that there is that cycle there, and they're going to have to figure out how to break it. Now, presumably later on, they're going to break it once they get to higher levels and once they know that they need to go to the Palace of Heart's Desires. But before then, your players are going to know that there's a lot of this fun inner roleplay. So while I'm here, let's talk about that roleplay between the hags. The hags don't want to interact with each other as much as possible, but they do interact with each other, right? They have to, because they know each other's secrets, because they're scheming against one another, because they do these things. They are constantly interacting with each other, basically by sending messages. But the thing is if your players drive any one of the hags to another location, then boom, the hag is going to go to another location. If your players actually present a meaningful threat to Bavlorna, she will retreat over to Hither, in which case your players are going to interact with Bavlorna there at Hither. And then the cycle is going to repeat itself later on. Now, what are some credible threats your players could have against Bavlorna? If they learn her secret, then she might just very well retreat. If your players do expose the fact that they know Bavlorna's secret, she may decide to just run away because she doesn't want to deal with it. Another aspect is the faction roleplay. If your players do get one of the factions to work alongside them, whether this be the Harengon Gang or the Saga Court or whoever it is, if your players get a bunch of NPCs by their side and decide to try and storm the castle here, Bavlorna's not going to deal with it. She's just going to simply hop on to her lily pad and fly off. Or, of course, if your players do approach this in a combat manner, but they are very smart in their combat approach, Bavlorna is going to simply jump out of a window, go over to her lily pad, and fly away once again, right? There's definitely a lot of nuance to be had here, whether regards of roleplay or combat or the exploration even of this location. There's a lot going on here. Reward your players for that creativity, allow them to drive in whatever direction that they want to, but make sure that you are ready to work with whatever they give you. Now, there's a few things I want to touch up on, but then I want to go back to just dealing all with Bavlorna. In Area 12, we've got the meat locker, and in here is where your players will be able to find Octavian's heart. So if your players explore around a bit, they'll be able to find it no problem. In Area 17, we've got a hooch distillery. If your players make their way in here and start messing around with a bunch of stuff, they could theoretically explode themselves. It's gonna do some damage. In fact, it could do quite a lot if your players mess up horribly, but it's more than likely that they're not going to. But still, it could absolutely be disruptive. Now, there is no other mention of what this hooch is actually doing in regards of if Bavlorna drinks it, or if she's selling to other people, or whatever. So what I would say is that you should make the hooch somewhat more apparent in this adventure, whether this just be right here in Bavlorna's or maybe throughout the lands of all of Prismeer, but just make the hooch more than just, oh, it's in this one room in this one entire area of all of Prismeer. In Area 18, we have Bavlorna's bedroom. So if your players are approaching from the inside and they just try to go up the stairs, Bavlorna's not going to let them, because why would you let someone into your private bedroom, right? It makes sense that she would allow people to walk around the rest of her home, but there is no reason why she would allow someone into her private bedroom. But if your players are sneaky, then they can make their way inside of here, and they'll find a whole bunch of goodies, a whole bunch of weird things going on, the will-o-wisp and the twig blights, and they can also find a whole bunch of treasure. So, once again, this definitely ties into how much are your players trying to get away with? Are they trying to steal from a bunch of things? Are they trying to basically just mess up all of her location? What exactly are they doing here? One thing I do really like about this location is if your players try and open up the padlock chest in the corner and they fail by 5 or more, it transforms into a small animated object and attacks. I really like that. And what's really cool about the contents of this chest is it foreshadows the future, but also is, kind of a nice little nod. We get here that there is a statue with a face of a moon and a sun that is pertaining to Endelyn Moongrave. We have an unpunched ticket from the original Witchlight Carnival owner from Isolde, and we get 3 spell scrolls of Identify that can be extremely useful in this adventure if you don't have anybody that knows Identify. Now in Area 19, this is where some interesting things are going on. This is Bavlorna's hoard, where presumably just all of her goodies are. But the thing is it presumes, basically through all of this text, that if your players basically show up here and they immediately make their way here, there is a shadow and it just killed a Lornling. Now, of course, this is pertaining to if your players rush to get up here. But what happens if your players are interacting with here for quite some time and Charm leaves? Then, of course, the shadow's not going to be here. And presumably the Lornling's probably going to get cleaned up, right? There is a lot of things going on here. I imagine something that could happen is Charm leaves and then your players are still around here, and then Bavlorna blames the dead Lornling on the PCs, that could certainly happen. But more importantly is the fact that in here there is the Stag Skull, which Clapperclaw wants in order to be a guide for your party. We also get some juicy details on Scabatha's weakness, and also we get a wooden mannequin which has a helm of telepathy, but if your players take that helm of telepathy, then the animated armor attacks. We also get a bronze frog statue, of which we get an art piece 4, and that is where if your players are willing to put their hand in this thing and declare the object out loud, then they can try and get it back. So normally if your players just see a frog statue, they're not going to know what the heck it is or what to do with it. But if they have been told by somebody or anybody that could possibly know what this thing actually is, then for sure it makes sense that they'd reach in their hand and declare what they want out loud. But you need to give that exposition away somehow. Or have Bavlorna just simply mention it. Oh yeah, you know, my frog statue, this is where I keep all my stuff. But I'm willing to bet she wouldn't say that out loud. It'd probably have to be someone else declaring that. So now let's take a deep dive into Bavlorna, because she's the real reason why your players are showing up. Your players presumably want or need something from her, but she's not giving anything away for free. She's going to use the party to her advantage, and the party is probably going to recognize that they need to be used by her in order to get what they want. So this sends your players into a whole bunch of different quests around the land, whether that be inside of Downfall or to eventually Hither. Now, her personality trait, ideal, bond, and flaws speak out to her character. The fact that she has other people do things for her, about how she lives in the present, and she doesn't want to do anything, go anywhere, and of course that she's allergic to widdershins. So the thing about her is she is really, really cool. I really like her as a villain. She's actually pretty strong as well. She's got some fun abilities. The fact that she, even though she's a medium creature, she can bite and swallow other medium creatures, lends that air of creepiness to this whole thing. She can polymorph people, which is really cool. She has a whole bunch of basically non-lethal combat options to fight a party, which I really like because, once again, she doesn't want to kill any party member. If she can, she'd basically down the party and then have them be used against one of her sisters, right? So what I strongly recommend throughout your player's entire involvement of Bavlorna is she is a tool for adventure. She is not just a one-stop shop bad guy that your players beat up in one go. Basically, you can have her guide your players to the next location by sending them on a quest, or if your players do decide to go down a confrontational route where they rally some forces or they use her weakness against her and beat her up, that she runs away and you make it obvious that she runs away to Hither, and your players want to chase after her because they know that they need to beat her up some more, and also they know that there is some other objects located around that they need to go find. And once your players have either done some quest for her to get Clapperclaw's skull back, or because they beat her up and now they have free reign of this place, then Clapperclaw can finally be reconvened with his original head, and your players can make their way from Hither to Thither. Now, the important thing to discuss is your players may not have the inkling to have Clapperclaw be the guide because maybe they're afraid of him, don't like him, or maybe they've been latched onto too many other NPCs and don't want to get another one involved. In which case, you do have to come up with a reason on how your players can get from Hither to Thither. Does another one of the NPCs that they know act as a guide? Or are your players just allowed to make their way from one place to another and you don't worry about the whole guide thing? Now, what I would say is you should definitely make a prominent NPC a guide from Hither to Thither if it's not going to be Clapperclaw. But Clapperclaw is just so gosh darn cute. How can you get rid of that character? Or another unique thing you could do is you could have Bavlorna give your players some sort of trinket or item that basically works as a one-time gateway from Hither to Thither, and then your players have to basically find a new way to get back. I think that's a pretty unique thing to do. Or, how about this? An object that allows you to pass 3 times between the barriers. Boom, right there. Your players can go there, come back, and then go once again. But once they're in this new location, then they're trapped there, right? But then they can work for a new object, or they can find a new guide. I think right there, that can be pretty riveting. However your players approach this whole situation, know that going from one location to the next is part of the adventure and charm here. Now, the real question is, though, do you want there to be a back and forth? Do you want your players to go from Hither to Thither, and then back and forth, and then from Thither to Yon, and Yon to Thither, and then, but once they're back in Yon, they got to go to Hither? Do you want that? Or do you want this to be more linear in that they're in Hither for a little bit, Thither for a little bit, Yon a little bit, Palace of Heart's Desires, End of story. If that is the case, then you do need to construct this in an environment where they just keep on going in the same direction and it works. So make sure that whatever quest you give out, make sure that it works for you, whether you're okay with them coming back to each location or not. As mentioned before, the majority of this adventure does come down to how you present these hags. Are they these big villains that are larger than life and your players need to smack them down? Or are they obstacles that your players have to overcome through using quests and tricks and whatever else? How you approach running the hags and how your players approach dealing with the hags is going to be this adventure, and whichever way you go about it is perfectly fine. Just know that if your players go down the combat-y approach, what I would strongly suggest is, if they get into a fight with Bavlorna, then she retreats over to Hither, and if your players get into a fight with the hags over in Hither, then the two of them go over to Yon, and once all three of them are at Yon, then you have all three of them retreat to the Palace of Heart's Desires, where finally, at the grand finale, you just have one epic conclusion battle, because that would be truly epic. But if you're not going down a combat-y approach, then just simply having it where all of the hags reconvene at the Palace of Heart's Desires for that grand finale is also a great way to go about it, because it'll be a great time of your players having navigated all of the enemies, and they confront them one last time, and if it comes down to combat, then, you know, there you go. Bavlorna Blightstraw is going to set the tone for what your players expect for dealing with these hags, so make sure that you read up on her character, make sure that you run her in a fun, unique, interesting way, and make sure that her goals line up in line with the 3 rules that dominate all of Prismeer, knowing that she cannot fight back, knowing that she can't steal directly, and knowing that she has to be welcoming of anybody that interacts with her. Do those things, and I promise you your players are going to have a rip-roaring great time. So go ahead and tell me, how do you like Bavlorna as a character? Do you think that she's going to be fun to run, or do you think that she is going to be a little bit strange? How do you imagine your players are going to deal with Bavlorna? Are they going to go straight to trying to fight her, or are they going to do individual quests to get little trinkets and items back and eventually work their way up to getting their true object of desire? And how are you going to approach this campaign? Are you going to have it where they go from one location to the next and it's just a straight one-way road, or are your players going to be backtracking from each location? Go ahead and tell me those things because I would love to hear it. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you for watching. Thanks for listening. And thank you to my amazing patrons. You guys are absolutely incredible. Thanks so very much. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.